The nurse squeezed my hand and whispered, "She might not survive the night." At that exact second, my phone lit up. A message from my son. "Mom, I'm at a party. Don't call." I looked up. And through the hospital glass, I saw him. Laughing in a car with two girls. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the end of something very important inside me. I'm really glad you're here. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support truly means more than you know. That morning felt completely normal. I woke before sunrise, like I always did, with sunlight filtering through the linen curtains in my kitchen in Minnesota. The first thing I noticed was the smell of coffee, smooth and warm, with just a hint of vanilla from the little creamer I'd bought last week. I stood there in my worn slippers, inhaling that familiar scent, and for a moment everything felt safe. Ordinary. Predictable. My phone sat beside the fruit bowl on the counter, buzzing softly with notifications I'd ignored while I filled the coffee pot. Photos of Evan and his wife Macy lit the screen, pictures from last Christmas, him grinning with a snowflake caught in his hair, her holding a mug with red mittens and laughing so hard her eyes nearly closed. I tapped the images absent-mindedly, smiling to myself. They looked happy. I thought, no, I believed they were happy. I had always believed that. As I packed, the sky brightened from gray to a soft blue, promising fair weather in Phoenix, where I was headed. I folded a warm scarf I knew Macy would love, wrapped it around a tin of homemade oatmeal cookies, and tucked a few travel-sized lotions into my purse, little comforts mothers carry for daughters, daughters-in-law, anyone you love. My suitcase closed with a soft click, and I told myself I was excited, not nervous, not worried, just eager to see them. I kissed the framed photo of my late husband on the mantel. "I'm going on a little adventure," I said softly, the way I used to say it to him when we were young, before life got loud with bills and responsibilities and unavoidable heartbreaks. I left house keys on the hook, double-checked the locks, and walked out the door with a calm that surprised me. On the plane, I sipped coffee and watched clouds drift in lazy waves beneath us. I thought of Evan's voice, the way he always sounded on the phone when something made him happy, that steady, easy tone. I thought of Macy's gentle laugh and the way she always thanked me for even the smallest things, cookies, scarves, a random postcard I once sent her of a sunflower field in summer. I remember picturing their front door opening as I stepped off the plane, Macy in her favorite jeans, smiling wide, Evan somehow both taller and kinder than the last time I'd seen him. I had imagined hugs, tea in the living room, stories swapped between sips. I had imagined peace. If I'd known then what I would find instead, how everything was already tilting toward ruin, I would have stayed in that sunlit kitchen for another hour. I would have inhaled the vanilla in the air 10 more times. I would have begged the morning not to end. But that morning did end. And I boarded the flight thinking I was going to a celebration. I didn't know I was flying straight into hell. I didn't even make it to their apartment before the first blow landed. The Phoenix air felt wrong to me, too dry, too bright, as if the sun here had no patience for softness. I rode up in the elevator with my suitcase bumping gently against my leg, rehearsing a cheerful hello, reminding myself not to fuss, not to mother too hard. Evan had always hated that. When the doors opened on their floor, I stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of fried onions and industrial cleaner. I found their door, and that was when I noticed the silence. No music. No television murmuring. No footsteps. Just a heavy stillness that made my skin tighten. Before I could knock, a woman came out of the apartment across the hall with a bag of trash. She froze when she saw me. Not because she recognized me, but because she recognized what I must be. "You're his mom," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. Something in her voice had already answered for me. "Yes," I managed. "I'm here to visit. Is everything all right?" Her eyes darted toward Evan's door, then back to my face. She lowered her voice to a whisper that felt like a confession. They took her in an ambulance 3 days ago. He didn't even go with her. For a moment, the hallway tilted. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so hard my fingers ached. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Macy, she said. Your daughter-in-law. She was bad. She was calling for help. I heard her. I knocked. No one opened. Then the paramedics came. They carried her out, and he just stood there like it was a delivery. My mouth went dry. I thanked her automatically, the way you thank someone who hands you a dropped glove, and then I turned away because my face had started to change and I didn't want a stranger to witness it. I didn't go into their apartment. I couldn't. Not yet. I walked back into the elevator and pressed the lobby button with a trembling finger, as if leaving the hallway might undo what I'd heard. Outside, I sat in my rental car and stared at the steering wheel until the lines of it blurred. I called Evan. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same. Then I called the hospital number the neighbor had given me from memory, as if she'd repeated it often enough to believe it could protect Macy. At the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. The waiting room lights were too bright, the chairs too firm, the television too loud with meaningless news. I gave Macy's name at the desk, and the woman behind the glass looked at me with a careful expression that told me she'd already decided this family was complicated. She's in ICU, she said. Immediate family only. I am immediate, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I'm her mother-in-law. I flew in from Minnesota. A long pause. Then a sigh, and a badge printed with my name. In the corridor outside the ICU, I found Evan leaning against a vending machine with his phone in his hand. He looked tired in a way that wasn't grief. He looked inconvenienced. When he saw me, his shoulders tightened, and his expression turned into something practiced. Mom, he said. What are you doing here? I stepped closer. Close enough to smell cologne under stress sweat. Close enough to see the faint red mark on his neck that didn't belong there. What happened to Macy? I asked. He exhaled sharply, as if I were the one causing trouble. She got sick, he said. It's under control. 3 days ago, I said. An ambulance. And you didn't go with her. His eyes flashed. Who told you that? So it's true. He glanced down the hallway, as if afraid someone might hear. I was dealing with things. Bills. Work. You don't understand what it's like. I didn't answer. I walked past him toward the ICU door. A nurse stopped me and checked my badge. Only a few minutes, she said gently, and pushed the door open. Macy lay in a bed surrounded by machines that breathed and beeped and measured what her body could not manage alone. Tubes ran from her arms. Her skin looked gray beneath the fluorescent light, and her lips were dry, cracked at the corners. I had packed her cookies. I had brought her a scarf. I stood there looking at the woman my son had promised to love, and all I could think was, someone left her like this. A doctor approached, flipping through a chart. His voice was calm, clinical, too calm for the violence of what he was describing. Severe dehydration, he said. Infection. Exhaustion. We're treating complications that didn't need to reach this point. How long? I asked. He looked at me directly. She was without adequate help for days. One more day, and we might not have been able to reverse it. I felt the words settle in my chest like stones. My son almost killed his own wife. When I stepped back into the hallway, Evan straightened as if preparing for an argument. I looked at him and realized something awful. He expected me to smooth this over. To understand. To forgive first, and ask questions later. I stared at his face, my child's face, and I saw a stranger wearing it. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't flown here to visit. I had flown here to choose a side. I stood there beside Macy's bed long after the nurse told me my time was up. I memorized the sound of the machines, the way her chest rose with help, not strength. When I finally stepped out, my hands were shaking the way they used to years ago, back when fear lived with me every day. That familiar tremor pulled me backward in time. I saw Evan as a little boy again, sitting at our kitchen table with his homework spread out, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. His father had already been gone then. A heart attack, sudden and cruel, leaving me with a mortgage, a child, and a silence that never quite left the house. I worked 3 jobs without telling anyone how tired I was. I learned how to stretch soup, how to smile when there was nothing left inside me. Evan became my reason. My anchor. My excuse to keep going. I missed school plays because I was working late, but I never missed his needs. Shoes, books, college applications, I handled everything. I told myself that sacrifice was love. That if I gave enough, he would grow into a man who knew how to give back. When he married Macy, I felt relief. She was gentle. Thoughtful. The kind of woman who folded towels neatly and thanked me for recipes. I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. I believed my job was done. I believed I had raised a good man. Standing in that hospital hallway, I realized how wrong I had been. The signs hadn't appeared overnight. They had crept in quietly. Small comments Evan made about Macy being too sensitive. Jokes about her not handling stress well. Complaints about money that somehow always ended with her apologizing. I heard them all and dismissed them. Mothers are very good at explaining away their son's cruelty. But now, every memory rearranged itself into something ugly and undeniable. The shaking in my hands stopped. In its place came clarity, cold, steady, irreversible. I understood then that this story didn't begin in that hospital room. It began years ago, in the moments I chose comfort over truth. In every excuse I made for him. In every silence I kept. And as I sat down in that hard plastic chair outside the ICU, I knew the past was done explaining itself. The present was about to demand answers. When I left the hospital that night, I didn't go back to Evan's apartment. I checked into a small hotel across the street, the kind with thin walls and furniture chosen for durability, not comfort. I lay fully dressed on the bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying conversations I had dismissed for years. At first, Evan had seemed perfect. Too perfect, really. Always smiling when I visited. Hugging me a little longer than necessary, as if performing the role of a good son. "Mom, I love you," he said often. Loudly. Publicly. Then the small things began. "She's bad with money," he told me once, casually, while Macy stood at the sink washing dishes. "She worries too much," another time. "She's weak. She couldn't manage without me." Each comment was delivered lightly, almost jokingly, as if I were expected to agree. And too often, I stayed quiet. Silence, I told myself, was neutrality. I know now it was permission. He controlled everything without ever calling it control. He handled the finances because numbers stressed her out. He answered messages for her because she hated confrontation. He chose where they went, who they saw, when they visited me. Macy slowly became smaller in his presence, like a voice turned down one notch at a time. I remembered a neighbor's words from months earlier, spoken awkwardly over a mailbox. "Your daughter-in-law cries at night," she had said. "I hear her sometimes." I laughed then. I said marriage was hard. I said young couples fight. I chose the easier explanation. Now, alone in that hotel room, I saw the pattern clearly. The missing jewelry Macy once wore daily. The way she always asked Evan before answering even simple questions. The exhaustion in her eyes that no amount of sleep ever seemed to fix. The next morning, I returned to the apartment while Evan was gone. The door opened too easily. Inside, the place felt stripped of warmth. Bills lay unopened on the counter. Past due notices mixed with collection letters. I recognized my own name on several documents. My name. Loans I had never taken. Accounts I had never opened. Everything routed through Evan, all justified with my signature copied neatly at the bottom. He had used my trust like a tool. Outside that night, I saw his car parked near a nightclub. Music thumped. Laughter spilled onto the sidewalk. He emerged later with another woman on his arm, carefree, unbothered. His wife was in a coma. Something settled inside me then. Not rage. Not hysteria. Decision. I went back to the hotel, sat at the small desk, and began writing everything down. Dates. Names. Amounts. Patterns. For the first time, I stopped protecting my son from the truth. He thought I would never use what I knew. He was wrong. By the third day, the hospital stopped feeling like a place you visit and started feeling like a place you belong to against your will. I learned the rhythm of it, the low mechanical breathing of the ventilators, the change of nurses by the sound of their shoes, the way voices automatically dropped after sunset, as if the walls themselves demanded restraint. Macy hadn't woken up. Her body was fighting, the doctors said, but it was doing so quietly, without drama. As if even survival required permission now. I sat beside her bed for hours, holding her hand when the nurses allowed it, feeling how light it was, how easily it fit inside my palm. She looked smaller than she ever had, diminished by neglect long before the illness itself. Evan came and went without any pattern. Some days he didn't come at all. Other days he appeared briefly, stayed 5 minutes, 10 at most. He never asked the doctors questions. Never stayed for updates. He stood too far from the bed, scrolling through his phone, as if proximity itself might accuse him. He never touched her. I began to notice things I might once have ignored. A call from the bank asking if I was aware of overdue payments tied to my name. A folded notice pushed under the apartment door about utilities scheduled for shutoff. Macy's wedding ring missing from the small plastic tray beside her bed. Her purse, delivered by the paramedics, nearly empty, no cash, no cards, nothing but a cracked compact and an old receipt. I started asking questions. Not emotional ones. Practical ones. A nurse mentioned Macy had missed multiple follow-up appointments. A social worker spoke carefully about ongoing financial stress at home. A doctor said exhaustion at this level doesn't come from a single bad week, it builds slowly, when someone is carrying more than they're allowed to put down. I went back to the apartment again, this time with intention instead of hope. Evan wasn't there. The space felt hollow, staged. Drawers opened easily. Files were poorly hidden. Calm on the surface, chaos underneath, exactly like Evan. The truth was everywhere once I allowed myself to see it. Credit cards maxed out. Loans stacked on top of loans. Late notices marked final. Emails from collection agencies flagged urgent. And again, my name. My address. My social security number. He hadn't just used my trust. He had hidden behind it. That evening, as I left the building, I saw his car parked a block away. Music thumped through the windows. He wasn't alone. A woman laughed in the passenger seat, her head thrown back, careless and free. Across the street, his wife lay in a hospital bed, breathing with help. Something hardened inside me then. Not rage. Not hysteria. Resolve. I stopped being a mother trying to protect her son from consequences. I became a woman protecting reality. Back in my hotel room, I spread every document across the bed. I photographed everything. I organized it by date, by source, by pattern. I wrote notes in the margins the way I used to when preparing reports at work, precise, unemotional, thorough. And then it became clear. Evan had made a fatal mistake. He assumed love meant blindness. He assumed I would always clean up after him. He assumed silence meant consent. He assumed wrong. When my phone rang close to midnight, I didn't flinch. I didn't rush. It was Evan. "Mom," he said when I finally answered, his voice tight with irritation disguised as concern. "Why are you asking questions? People are calling me." I looked at the papers spread around me. At the proof. At the hospital window across the street, glowing softly in the dark, where his wife lay between breaths. "I'm not asking questions," I said calmly. "I'm finding answers." He laughed, sharp, brittle. "You're overreacting. This doesn't concern you." I felt something close to pity. "It concerns me," I replied. "It concerns Macy. And very soon, it will concern people you won't be able to charm or intimidate." Silence filled the line. Then anger. "You don't know what you're doing," he snapped. "You'll ruin everything." I ended the call without responding. That night, sitting alone with the evidence, I understood something with absolute clarity. This was no longer about family. This was about accountability. And I was only just beginning. I woke before dawn the next morning with a calm that felt almost unnatural. Fear had burned itself out overnight, leaving behind something far more dangerous, certainty. My hands didn't shake as I showered. My thoughts didn't race as I dressed. I moved with the quiet precision of someone who had already decided and was now simply executing. I laid the documents out on the desk one final time. Bank statements. Loan agreements. Copies of forged signatures. Screenshots. Timelines. I checked them the way I used to check reports at work, not for emotion, not for justice, but for accuracy. In a way, I was preparing for court, even if I didn't yet know which one. My first call was to the police. "My car is being used without my consent," I said evenly. "I believe it's connected to financial fraud." There was a pause, not confusion, but interest. I gave my name, my address, my son's name. I didn't tell them about the hospital. I didn't mention betrayal. I spoke only in facts. Facts carry more authority than tears ever could. An officer met me outside the apartment building that afternoon. The Arizona sun was unforgiving, sharp against the pavement. Evan arrived late, just as he always did. He looked irritated, distracted, confident. When he saw me, he smiled, that familiar, polished smile he had learned young, the one he used when he believed charm could erase consequences. Then the officer asked him to step aside. Then the questions began. Then the handcuffs came out. Evan stared at me as if I were a stranger. As if I were the one who had crossed a line. His face twisted, not with guilt, but with disbelief. "You did this," he hissed under his breath as they led him away. I met his eyes, steady and clear. "No," I said quietly. "You did." After that, everything accelerated. Lawyers returned my calls within hours. A financial investigator confirmed what I already knew: the fraud was extensive, deliberate, and documented. The apartment, purchased in part with my money and my credit, was legally transferred into Macy's name. I signed the papers myself in a quiet office that smelled of toner and stale coffee. My hand did not tremble. Then I made one more call. A reporter had already heard fragments of the story. I didn't embellish. I handed over copies. Dates. Records. Proof. I let the facts speak, because they were loud enough on their own. The story broke the next day. Headlines. Photos. Documents laid out for strangers to see. A devoted husband photographed laughing outside nightclubs while his wife lay dying. Loans taken out in his mother's name. Affairs hidden behind hospital walls. Evan went on television that evening. His face was flushed, his voice loud, his words desperate. This is fake. She's lying. But doctors spoke. Medical records spoke. Neighbors spoke. Financial documents spoke. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. That night, I sat beside Macy's bed as the room filled with a different kind of silence, not the silence of machines, but the silence that comes after truth has been spoken. She woke briefly. When she understood what had happened, tears slid down her face. I held her hand, and we cried together, not from shock, but from release. Down the hallway, my son sat alone on a hard plastic chair, his world reduced to white walls and the echo of his own choices. No friends. No admirers. No one to charm. He lost his job. He lost his reputation. He lost the life he'd built on lies. And he lost me. Not in anger. Not in hatred. In truth. That was the moment everything finally changed. The hospital room grew quiet in the days that followed, not suddenly, but carefully, as if silence itself was learning how to exist there. The machines were still present, still necessary, but their sound softened, less urgent, less demanding. Macy began to wake for longer stretches. Her eyes focused. Her fingers tightened around mine when I spoke to her. That alone felt like a small miracle. When she cried, she did it without embarrassment. No apologies. No explanations. Just tears, steady and honest. I cried with her sometimes, and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I simply sat beside her, letting my presence say what words could not. We were not mother and daughter, not exactly, but something steadier than that. Two women who had survived the same man in different ways. Evan was no longer allowed near her. The hospital staff enforced it gently but firmly. Security escorted him out the one time he tried to enter, his voice raised, his posture indignant, still convinced that outrage could substitute for innocence. I watched from the end of the hall as he argued, then faltered, then finally fell silent. That silence followed him afterward, clinging tighter than handcuffs ever could. He lost everything quickly after that. His employer released a statement. His friends disappeared. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. People who had laughed with him in restaurants now crossed the street when they saw him coming. Reputation, I learned, doesn't shatter. It evaporates. I did not intervene. That surprised me most of all. I had spent a lifetime cushioning his falls, smoothing his mistakes, translating his behavior into something more acceptable. This time, I did nothing. Not out of cruelty, but out of respect for reality. Consequences are not punishment. They are instruction. Macy stayed in the hospital for weeks. Recovery was slow and uneven. Some days she felt strong enough to sit up and talk about the future. Other days she slept through the afternoon, exhausted by memories her body still carried. I stayed nearby, renting a small apartment instead of returning home. It felt important to remain close, not as a savior, but as a witness. One afternoon, she asked me a question I had been waiting for. "Why didn't you look away?" she asked quietly. "You could have." I thought about it before answering. "Because I already knew what it cost to look away," I said. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Evan called once, late at night. His voice sounded smaller, unfamiliar. "I need help," he said. I closed my eyes. "You need accountability," I replied. "I can't give you that." He didn't argue. That told me more than anger ever could. When I hung up, I felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Only a deep, settled grief, not for the man he had become, but for the boy I once loved without question. Grief, I learned, does not always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from clarity. On the day Macy was discharged, the sky was pale and open, the kind of day that asks nothing of you. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but she walked on her own. When we reached the exit, she stopped and looked back at the building. "I'm not going back to that life," she said. "I know," I answered. And for the first time since I arrived in Phoenix, I believed the future could exist without fear. Nothing returned to what it had been. That was the reward. Not revenge. Not justice. Freedom. A year passed quietly. Not the kind of year marked by celebrations or announcements, but the kind that heals in small, unremarkable ways. Seasons changed. Papers were signed. Doors closed without slamming. Life rearranged itself without asking permission. Macy recovered slowly. Her strength returned unevenly, like light coming back after a long winter. Some days she was radiant with plans, other days she moved carefully, listening to her body as if it were learning a new language. She never rushed herself again. That, I think, was the first real victory. She opened a small art studio not far from where she now lived. Nothing grand. White walls. Tall windows. The smell of paint and clean wood. I watched her hang her first pieces with hands that no longer shook. People came. They lingered. They asked questions. They saw her, not as someone's wife, not as a survivor, but as herself. I moved nearby, close enough to walk, close enough to help without hovering. We learned each other gently. Mornings with tea. Evenings with quiet conversation. Shared silences that didn't demand explanation. We became family in the truest sense, not by blood or obligation, but by choice. There was no fear in our home. No secrets. No raised voices behind closed doors. The past existed, but it no longer governed us. It stayed where it belonged, acknowledged, understood, and finally set down. As for my son, I did not follow his life after that. I did not check records or ask questions. Letting go was not dramatic. It was firm. Love without boundaries had nearly destroyed 2 lives. I was done confusing sacrifice with virtue. What I gained was not revenge. It was peace. A peace built on truth. On self-respect. On the understanding that love must never require silence, endurance, or self-betrayal. This is what I learned. Love without limits can destroy both the victim and the child. Sometimes, to save one life, you have to let another go. Names and details have been changed. If you've listened this far, I invite you to reflect. What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts. Stay with me. There are more stories like this, quiet, honest, and real.